Hello everyone and welcome to my Y&R Trends channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The world of Genoa City, a place perpetually balanced on the precipice of revelation and ruin, had absorbed its fair share of seismic shocks. Fortunes were lost and found in a single stock report. Marriages were forged and shattered in the space of an afternoon, and long-buried identities had a habit of clawing their way to the surface with devastating timing. Yet, even by these standards, the gathering in the grand living room of the Abbott mansion felt different. The air was not merely thick with anticipation, it was charged with a strange, unnerving stillness, as if the very house was holding its breath. Claire Grace, once a specter of vengeance and now a tentative, fragile member of the family fold, had requested this meeting. Her journey from the tormented niece of Jordan, intent on burning the Newman dynasty to the ground, to a young woman cautiously accepting the shelter of her grandparents' love, had been a public and painful one. Every smile she offered Kay and Nikki was hard-won, every moment of peace a victory over a traumatic past. So when she stood before them, her hands clasped tightly to still their trembling, the collective gaze of the Abbott and Newman clans fixed upon her with a mixture of protective concern and deep-seated anxiety. They had prepared themselves for a setback, a confession of a nightmare, a moment of regression into the darkness she had fought so hard to escape. They were not prepared for the quiet, earth-shattering sentence that left her lips. "I'm pregnant," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper, yet it echoed in the silent room with the force of a detonation. The immediate aftermath was a study in suspended animation. Victoria Newman, who had become a fierce maternal advocate for Claire, felt the blood drain from her face, her mind racing through 1,000 calculations of support and damage control. Nikki, her own life a testament to resilience and secrets, gripped the arm of her chair, her sharp eyes searching Claire's for the story behind the statement. Across the room, Kyle Abbott, who had been leaning against the mantelpiece with an air of detached support, felt his entire body go rigid. His own life was a complicated tapestry of failed marriages, corporate ambition, and a deep, aching love for his son Harrison. His connection to Claire had been a strange, unexpected thread in that tapestry, a brief, intense collision of two wounded souls seeking solace in the aftermath of their respective storms. It had been a mistake, they had both agreed, a moment of profound weakness born from shared understanding and too much wine, a lapse they had vowed to lock away and never speak of again. As Claire's words hung in the air, that locked box was blown wide open, and Kyle's world tilted on its axis. The color fled from his face, and his knuckles turned white where they gripped the marble. He didn't need to say a word. The panic in his eyes was a silent scream that everyone in the room, especially his ex-wife Summer, who was watching him with dawning, horrified comprehension, could hear perfectly. It was in this vortex of shock, where unspoken questions about paternity swirled like a gathering storm, that Claire delivered her second, even more staggering blow. She seemed to draw strength from their stunned silence, her posture straightening, her chin lifting with a defiant resolve that reminded everyone present of the fierce survivor that lay beneath her gentle exterior. "I know what you're all thinking," she continued, her voice gaining a steely edge. "And I want to make one thing perfectly clear right here, right now. There will be no DNA test. Not now, not ever. This is my decision, my child, and I will not have its life or my own become a subject for debate, a pawn in a game of what if. The paternity of this baby is not up for discussion." Her gaze, sharp and unwavering, swept across the room and landed squarely on Kyle. It was not a look of accusation or plea, but one of absolute, immovable finality. In that single look, she erected a wall between them, a boundary he was forbidden to cross. The ban was not just a request, it was a decree. The silence that followed this proclamation was even deeper, more profound, than the one that had greeted her pregnancy announcement. It was a silence fractured by the sound of Kyle's world crumbling. To be told a child was coming, a child that might be his flesh and blood, his second chance at fatherhood in the midst of his own personal chaos, and then to be immediately publicly stripped of any right to know, to claim, to even question, was a form of psychological torture he had never imagined. For Kyle, the days that followed were a blur of suffocating frustration and impotent rage. Every instinct he possessed, honed by years of Abbott ambition and a father's love for Harrison, screamed at him to act, to demand, to fight. He replayed that single night with Claire over and over in his mind, analyzing every word, every glance, trying to find a loophole in her ironclad decree. He saw the way his family tiptoed around him, their pitying glances only fueling his anger. His father, Jack, attempted a measured approach, speaking of respecting Claire's traumatic history and her need for autonomy, but Kyle was in no mood for Abbott diplomacy. Autonomy? He'd snapped, pacing the length of his father's office. This isn't about autonomy, Dad. This is about my right to know if I have a child. How can she do this? How can she just unilaterally decide to cut me out? Meanwhile, Claire, bolstered by the fierce, unwavering support of Victoria and a surprisingly protective Nikki, began to build her fortress. She moved out of the Abbott mansion, citing her need for independence and peace, finding a small, secure apartment where she could navigate her pregnancy away from the constant, pressing weight of Kyle's desperate, questioning eyes. Her decision was not born of malice, but of a deep primal fear. Her entire life had been a lie, her identity a weapon used against her. The thought of her child being subjected to that same uncertainty, of having its origin become a public spectacle, a legal battle, a source of conflict before it even drew its first breath, was unbearable to her. In her mind, the only way to protect her baby was to sever, completely and irrevocably, any link to the doubt and drama that paternity questions would inevitably bring. The tension did not remain contained within the family's inner circle for long. Genoa City, after all, is a town that thrives on the oxygen of scandal. Whispers began at the top of the tower, fueled by the sudden, visible strain between Kyle and Claire at corporate events, where they now orbited each other like hostile planets. The always perceptive Phyllis Summers, smelling a story that could shake the very foundations of the city's two most powerful families, began her own investigation, her network of informants working overtime. It was only a matter of time before the dam broke. A carefully worded, anonymously sourced item appeared in the Restless style, hinting at a mysterious pregnancy, rocking a prominent family and the furious battle over paternity that was ensuing behind closed doors. While no names were printed, the clues were broad enough for anyone in the know to connect the dots. The public revelation acted like gasoline on Kyle's smoldering fury. No longer able to contain himself, he cornered Claire outside of Newman Enterprises, his voice a low, furious growl meant only for her. This has to stop, Claire. This silence. This ban. The whole town is talking. They're going to figure it out. Let me in. Let me do the test. If it's negative, you have your peace. If it's positive, then we deal with it. Together. But Claire, placing a protective hand on her still flat stomach, met his anger with a chilling calm. There is no we, Kyle, she stated, her voice devoid of emotion. You made your choices, I'm making mine. This child is mine. Your name will not be on any birth certificate. You have no rights here. And if you try to fight me on this, I will disappear. You will never see me or this child again. I promise you that. This ultimatum plunged Kyle into a moral and legal abyss. He consulted lawyers in secret, their words offering little comfort. Without Claire's consent or a court order based on compelling evidence, which was nearly impossible to obtain given their brief, secretive relationship, his hands were tied. He was trapped in a nightmare of his own making, tormented by the ghost of a possibility. His behavior became increasingly erratic, his focus at Jabot Campos deteriorating, his interactions with his own son, Harrison, now tinged with a new, painful layer of longing and loss. He found himself staring at Claire from across crowded rooms, watching the subtle changes in her body, imagining a future where a child who shared his blood would call another man father, or worse, grow up believing he had never wanted them. The not knowing was a corrosive acid, eating away at his sanity. Meanwhile, Claire's pregnancy began to show, a visible symbol of her resolve and his powerlessness. She was embraced fully by the Newman women, who formed a protective phalanx around her, their own complicated histories with motherhood forging a bond of fierce, unshakable loyalty. Victoria became her champion, handling the media with icy efficiency, while Nikki, drawing on her own painful past, offered a gruff, pragmatic kind of support that Claire found strangely comforting. In their presence, Claire felt strong, justified in her decision. But in the quiet of the night, alone in her apartment, doubts would creep in. She would think of the child growing inside her, A child who might one day look at her with Kyle's eyes and wonder if her act of protection was also an act of profound cruelty. Was she robbing her son or daughter of a father to save them from potential pain? Or was she, in her trauma, repeating the cycles of secrecy and lies that had defined her own tragic beginning? The situation created impossible alliances and bitter fractures. Summer, watching Kyle's agonizing descent, was torn between a lingering care for the father of her child and a simmering resentment toward Claire, whom she saw as a manipulative force destroying Kyle's life. She found herself in the bizarre position of defending Claire's right to make her own choices to a furious Kyle, while simultaneously seething at the woman for wielding that power so absolutely. Jack Abbott was caught in the middle, his loyalty to his son warring with his hard-won role as Claire's grandfather and his desire to see her find the stability she had never known. The Abbott family dinners, once a bastion of genteel, if sometimes fraught, tradition, became silent, tense affairs, the unspoken topic a specter at the table. As Claire's second trimester progressed, a new, more dangerous variable entered the equation. Tucker McCall, ever the opportunist, saw the schism between the Newmans and Abbotts not as a tragedy, but as a strategic advantage. He began to subtly court a vulnerable Kyle, offering a sympathetic ear and vague promises of support, seeing a way to exploit Kyle's desperation to weaken Jack's position at Genoa. The pregnancy was no longer just a personal crisis. It was becoming a corporate weapon, and Claire's unborn child was at the center of a looming business war it knew nothing about. The relentless pressure finally culminated in a private, explosive confrontation at the Abbott boathouse, a place that had witnessed so many of the family's pivotal moments. Kyle, having learned from a gossiping Phyllis that Claire was there seeking solitude, found her staring out at the dark water. The facade of calm he had seen in her before was gone. She looked tired, vulnerable, and deeply sad. "Why, Claire?" he asked, his voice raw with exhaustion, all the anger drained away, leaving only a desperate need for understanding. "Just tell me why you hate me so much that you would do this." Claire turned to him, tears finally glistening in her eyes. "It's not about hate, Kyle," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Don't you see? It's about survival. My entire life, my very existence was a question mark. A test result. A revelation that destroyed everything. I will not let that happen to my child. I will not have them be a maybe. I would rather they have one certain parent who loves them unconditionally than two who are locked in a battle over their very identity. This isn't about punishing you. This is about saving them." In that moment, Kyle saw not the formidable adversary, but the terrified orphan who had been taught that family ties were the most dangerous traps of all. He finally understood that her ban was not a wall built to keep him out, but a shield, clumsily and absolutely constructed to protect the most precious thing she would ever have from the same hell she had endured. He had no words, no legal precedent, no angry retort that could counter the sheer, devastating truth of her trauma. He simply looked at her, at the faint curve of her stomach, and felt the fight drain out of him, replaced by a profound and heartbreaking wave of helplessness. He had lost. Not in a court of law, but in the court of a pain so deep he could never hope to fully comprehend it. He turned and walked away, leaving Claire alone in the boathouse, the silent lake bearing witness to a tragedy that was still unfolding, a future forever altered by a secret that one would carry as a burden, and the other as a salvation. The question of paternity remained, a ghost in the nursery, its answer known only to Claire, a truth she held onto like a life raft in a storm she was determined to weather alone. The tension inside the Abbott mansion could be cut with a knife. The morning sun poured through the tall windows, but the light did nothing to brighten the mood. Kyle Abbott stood near the fireplace, his hands buried deep in his pockets, staring at the floor as if the answer to his problems might appear there. Across the room, Claire Grace sat stiffly on the couch, her face pale yet defiant. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind for days, but no amount of preparation could soften the impact of what she was about to say. Summer had been avoiding the house all morning, suspecting that something was about to explode. Jack and Diane had been whispering in the study, and even Harrison had sensed the tension, retreating to his room after breakfast. Then Claire finally stood up, her heart pounding in her chest like a war drum, and said the words that froze everyone in place. "I'm pregnant." The air was immediately sucked out of the room. For a few seconds nobody moved, nobody spoke. Jack looked as though he hadn't heard correctly, and Diane's hand gripped the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles turned white. Kyle lifted his head slowly, his expression unreadable at first, but then his lips parted, and disbelief turned into visible shock. "You're what?" he asked, his voice cracking just slightly, betraying the emotion he was trying to suppress. Claire straightened her back and repeated herself with deliberate calm. "I said I'm pregnant, Kyle. And before you ask, yes, it's yours." The words hit him like a thunderclap. Kyle took a step back, running a trembling hand through his hair. Memories of their time together flashed through his mind. The confusion, the guilt, the chemistry that neither of them could fully deny even when they both knew it was wrong. He had told himself that it was just a mistake, that it would fade into a forgotten chapter of his life, but now that chapter was rewriting everything. Diane's eyes darted between them, trying to make sense of it. "Claire, this can't be true," she said in disbelief. "You and Kyle?" "It's true," Claire cut her off. "You don't have to believe me, but the truth is the truth. I found out 2 weeks ago, and I've already seen a doctor." She held up a folded piece of paper, the ultrasound printout, proof of her claim. Kyle stared at it as though it were some alien artifact. For Jack, the room seemed to spin. He had seen more than his fair share of scandal and heartbreak in this house, but this was something new. He had grown to trust Claire in recent months, after her redemption from the dark shadow of Jordan's manipulation. He had seen her as a fragile young woman trying to rebuild her life. Now she was standing before them with a secret that could unravel everything. Diane was the first to regain her composure, and predictably, her instinct was to protect her son. "We'll need to do a DNA test immediately," she said sharply, her voice slicing through the thick silence. "That's the only way to confirm any of this." But before Kyle could even respond, Claire's expression hardened. "No," she said, firm and absolute. "There will be no DNA test. I won't allow it." The shock of that statement was almost greater than the pregnancy itself. Kyle blinked in disbelief. "What are you talking about? Of course we have to do a DNA test. If you're saying this child is mine, then I have a right to know the truth." Claire's hand shook slightly, but her tone remained steady. "I've made up my mind. I'm not putting myself or this baby through that circus. You'll just have to take my word for it." The word circus stung Kyle because deep down he knew what she meant. The Abbott name came with scandal, headlines, gossip, and scrutiny. Still, that wasn't enough of a reason to deny the truth. "Claire, this isn't just about you," Kyle argued. "If I'm the father, I have responsibilities. I have a son, I have a family. This changes everything. We can't just... You can't control everything," she cut in sharply, her eyes flashing with emotion. "You've been living in that mansion thinking every problem can be solved with money or a test or a lawyer. Not this time." Jack stepped in before the argument spiraled further. "All right, both of you stop," he said in his authoritative tone. "We're not going to settle this in one morning." But he knew the damage was done. The storm had already begun. Diane looked ready to explode. Kyle looked lost, and Claire looked as though she had built a wall around herself. Jack could see the pain behind her composure. He'd seen that same guarded look in her mother's eyes before everything went wrong. When the others left the room, Kyle stayed behind, unable to move. Claire turned to leave, but he spoke softly. "Why are you doing this, Claire? Why won't you let me prove the truth?" She paused at the door, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because sometimes the truth destroys everything. And I'm not going to let that happen again." When Claire finally stepped outside, she could feel her heart racing with a mixture of defiance and fear. She had expected anger, denial, maybe even cruelty, but the quiet devastation on Kyle's face haunted her. She knew what everyone in town would think, that she was lying, manipulating, trying to trap Kyle, or even that she wasn't pregnant at all. But she was. The baby was real, and so were the consequences. She wasn't doing this for revenge or power. She was doing it because she believed this child deserved peace. In her mind, the Abbott name was both a blessing and a curse. It could give her baby everything and take everything away in the same breath. Claire had lived through manipulation and deceit before. She wasn't about to let history repeat itself. Meanwhile, Diane's fury grew in the halls of the Abbott mansion. To her, this was nothing short of a calculated move. She had spent years trying to protect Kyle from schemers and heartbreakers, and now, after all the chaos with Summer, Harrison and his family, another woman had walked into his life with a scandalous secret. Jack tried to calm her, insisting that accusations wouldn't help, but Diane wasn't hearing any of it. She wanted answers, and if Claire wouldn't agree to a DNA test, Diane vowed to find a way to get one herself. What none of them realized was that Claire's secret ran deeper than any of them imagined. Her decision to ban the DNA testing wasn't just stubbornness, it was protection. Protection from something that could tear not only the Abbotts apart, but also expose a hidden truth about her past that could change Genoa City forever.